to whom God was revealing His truth. They gave it to the congregation publicly when it was revealed, and then, of course, they would reiterate it again and again. What about knowledge? Verse 8 says that there is knowledge. If there is knowledge, what are we talking about here? Well, we're talking really about divine revelation again. This is communication of truth that comes from God. Spiritual knowledge, which you cannot know unless God discloses it. The world is full of people who think they're spiritual. They say, I'm a very spiritual person, as if they could ascend into the non-temporal spiritual realm and draw real, true conclusions. Of course, they can't. The spiritual world is closed to us. We have no access to it. Only God can reveal it to us. And so, if God does that, you might say that there were people in the early church who had the gift of knowledge. God disclosed His truth to them. They could look at the Scripture. They could listen to the prophets, and they could draw conclusions concerning the truth of God. Then there was this tongues. Again, a speaking gift. All three are speaking gifts, and they were important in the church because they communicated to the church at its widest point. This is a speaking gift. This is the ability to speak languages you don't know, miraculously, under divine power. A sign of authenticity. How do you know that the teacher is giving you something actually from God? How do you know that the church is really communicating the truth of God? How do you know the knowledge is the true knowledge of God? Well, here is a sign that is evidence of supernatural inspiration. The use of language is unknown to the speaker and unknown to all the hearers, though perhaps known to some, as on the day of Pentecost. There were gifts of interpretation so that what was spoken could be translated, but it was still a sign. The details of that gift are in chapter 14. That's a study for another time. The point is, prophecy, as important as it is, temporary. Knowledge, as important as it is, temporary. Languages, as important as they are, temporary. That's the point. But let's look at these three. And I want you to carefully look at the language here because it's really important. Note an interesting detail in the passage. Knowledge and prophecy will be done away. Will be done away. Tongues will cease. Different verbs with very strikingly different meaning. Change of verbs. The first indication that tongues would cease before prophecy and knowledge is the change of verbs in verse 8. Now follow this. The verb form used in relation to prophecy and knowledge will be done away as katargeo, Greek verb. It's used actually 4 times in verses 8 to 11. And it should be translated, shall be set aside, shall be rendered inoperative, or simply shall be stopped. Shall be stopped. Something is going to stop prophecy and knowledge. Something is going to put a quick and immediate and final end to prophecy and knowledge. That's why that verb is used. In the middle, referring to tongues, it says they will cease. Pauo, a completely different word. This is intransitive. It takes no object. It must be understood in this sense. It will cease by itself. The forms of katargeo, it will stop, are passive verbs. You know what a passive verb is? That declares that something will bring its end. It will be acted upon. But pauo, referring to tongues, is what we call in the Greek a middle voice that is reflexive. Something will stop prophecy. Something will stop this knowledge of all the mysteries, as it's referred to earlier in the chapter. But tongues will cease by itself. So you're intensifying the idea that the subject plays the role in the action. It literally ceases by itself. So we have two very distinct points to make here. Prophecy and knowledge, they'll be stopped by something acting upon them. Tongues will cease by itself. Septuagint uses the middle form of pauo 15 times to translate the Hebrew word which means to be at an end, to be accomplished, to be spent, to be finished, to be complete. I think the best translation would be like this. Prophecy will be stopped. Knowledge will be ended. Tongues will cease by itself. Now, why is this distinction made? And it's a very clear distinction. Why wouldn't the same event that stops prophecy and knowledge also stop tongues? Well, there's only one possible reason. The coming of whatever it is that stops prophecy and knowledge would stop tongues if tongues was still there, which means that they cease by themselves previously. It is important to observe that tongues are not among the things which Paul predicts will be stopped. Go down to verses 9 and 10. We know in part. We prophesy in part. Now he's dropped tongues. All he's talking about here is knowledge and prophecy. But when the perfect comes, the partial will be done away. So now we know what stops prophecy and tongues. What is it? The perfect. What is that? I'm going to tell you that. When the perfect comes, it will stop knowledge, supernaturally given revelatory knowledge, and it will stop prophecy in the sense of supernaturally given revelatory prophecy. It will stop it. There is no further mention after verse 8 of tongues. Tongues are not among those things